Hello and welcome again to this Red Gaming Tech video. Myself, Marta, where as always I'm here with the latest news from the tech world in the last 24 or so hours. We've got a very AMD focused video again for you today, and we're going to start off with this month's figures from mindfactory.de. In case you haven't seen any of my previous videos on this, basically mindfactory.de is one of these most popular hardware retailers on the internet in Germany. So obviously this is just for Germany, it is not retrospective of the whole world, but every month they release data from their sales, which basically shows how AMD is doing against Intel in terms of number of CPUs sold, revenue, and so on. Now, obviously we were very much anticipating the results from July, because that was when we finally saw the release of Ryzen 7, but August I would say is just as important, because obviously the hype has started to die down and things potentially could start to level off. So let's talk about the results for this month. So we pretty much see a continuation of the trend that we saw in July. So we saw 78% of the CPUs sold being mindfactory.de being AMD, and the 22% remaining being Intel. That is only a 1% decrease from last month, where AMD saw 79% of CPUs being sold. Now we also see an interesting breakdown of the revenue in euros. So in case you've again missed my previous videos on this topic, we have seen a lead for AMD in the amount of CPUs sold for quite a few months now, but it's been much closer in terms of revenue, just due to the price differences between the two companies. But AMD have been very much in the lead again here versus Intel. So just to give a bit of backstory to this, for example, this month we see 72% of revenue in euros being made by AMD, the remaining 28% by Intel. Last month it was 75% to AMD and 25% to Intel, and the previous month, that being June, it was 52% to AMD and the 48% remaining was to Intel. So just to give you an idea of the discrepancy, the number of CPUs sold for June was 68% to AMD and 32% to Intel. So a kind of example of what I'm talking about here. But it does not stop there, my friends, because we also see what CPUs people were actually buying for each company. So unsurprisingly, a huge portion of the AMD CPUs purchased were Matisse, which is obviously Ryzen 3000. 53% was Matisse, 29% was Pinnacle Ridge, which of course is the second generation, or Zen Plus, should I say, of Ryzen. So 2700X and so on. And then we kind of get a little bit of an even split between the rest. 10% Raven Ridge, 5% Summit Ridge, 3% Picasso, and then Threadripper is very small percent, to the point where I can't even read it, probably about 1% if I had to guess. So what about Intel though? Well, unsurprisingly, a big portion of theirs goes to the Coffee Lake refresh, which is 71% of their CPUs sold, and 24% going to the vanilla Coffee Lake, 4% is Kaby Lake, and the remaining is Skylake X. As for revenue, unsurprisingly for AMD, again, the lion's share of the pie here is going to Matisse. 70% of revenue was Matisse, and the biggest portion other than that would of course Pinnacle Ridge at 20%. Similar story for Intel, to be fair. Coffee Lake refresh, 76% of revenue being made and 16% going to the vanilla Coffee Lake. So long story short, basically AMD's absolute tear that we saw in July is continuing, and this is following on from months of a pretty nice lead over Intel in terms of number of CPUs sold. How long will this continue? Probably for quite some time, but of course it's tough to say. Unfortunately, as per normal, I misplaced my crystal ball. But unfortunately we're going to move on from that to less good news regarding the third generation of Ryzen, which is the boost clocks. So one of the things we've been talking a lot with Ryzen 3000 is of course the boost clocks, and how in a lot of cases for everyday uses they are just not reaching the advertised boost clocks for numerous people. There's been a lot of discussion about why this is. Motherboards are undoubtedly playing a factor. There was also recent comments from an ASUS employee which basically stated that AMD themselves reduced the stock Ryzen 3000 boost clocks to avoid damaging CPUs due to temperature concerns. Go watch my old video if you missed it, because, well, it is rather interesting. They basically added a middle temperature limit, and again reduce the boost clocks to avoid damaging the processors. That is the TLDR, but I do go into more detail in my video, so go check that out if you haven't already. But one of the things I mentioned when I was discussing that was the fact that the well-known overclocker Debauer was asking for opinions, a survey to be filled out by his viewers as to the boost clocks that they were actually getting in their gaming or whatever use cases they were using their Ryzen 3000 processor for. And well, he had quite the response. 2,726 users joined in, and they all gave valid results, even told the Geisa version and so on and so forth. So, I will of course link his video in the description below this video, and to be honest, his results are worse than I expected. Go watch his video because it's worth watching, but it does reveal worse, again, than expected boosting. Again, I want to know what you guys have experienced as well. Go watch his video, and then let me know in the comments, or after this video, whatever your order you desire, and let me know what boost clocks you are actually getting, and what setup you actually have for your Ryzen 3000. I want to know, from our viewers' perspective, what this actually is like. So, not great for his findings, but again, go check out his video. We're going to move on, however, to some slightly better news with a benchmark for the AMD EPYC 7742. So basically, a fellow by the name of Patrick Kennedy, editor-in-chief over at Serve the Home, well, he just casually decided he wanted to set a whole new world record for the EPYC 7742 processors on Geekbench 4, to be specific. So they compared a pair of these chips against 4 Intel Xeon Platinum 8180M, and AMD went on an absolute tear and was once again in this video the clear winner. Just as a refresher, in case you're not familiar with the specs off the top of your head, the EPYC 7742 has 64 cores and 128 threads, whereas the Xeon has the Xeon 8180M, has 28 cores and 56 threads. So, again, they ran this Geekbench 4 several times, and they had some varying scores, because again, you're going to get some variations between results, but basically the AMD system obtained scores between, that being multi-core scores, between 184,000 to 193, whereas the best was actually 193,554. So, before I move on to Intel, the single core score was 4,876 on that result. That got the 193,554. What about the Xeon, I hear you ask, however? So the single core score, that's a tongue twister, was 4,700, and the best result was 155,050, of course, in single core and multi-core scores respectively. What does this actually mean? Well, basically AMD outperforms Intel in this particular case by 3.74% in single core and 24.83% in multi-core. Now, important to remember, this is without tweaks, and this is without any dual socket EPYC 7742 servers by big name vendors being released. So this was just on a reference AMD platform. All very important to remember. So this world record basically is not going to stand for long, but that's not really what we're here to discuss. We're here to talk about the fact that EPYC has very much crushed the Xeon in this particular instance. So AMD just on an absolute tear in this video. And one last AMD thing to focus on for today before I move on to our final topic, which is yet more graphics drivers being added to Linux. So the last few days, Paul has been talking an awful lot about Renoir, and we have yet more here. We have Renoir display support, words are hard apparently, being added to the most recent patches, wiring up DCN 2.1 and other display core bits for this next APU. Now this also does bring with it a bunch of fixes concerning GPU VM hardware bug workarounds, GPU reset VRAM bug fixes, and so on and so forth. There's also a bunch of fixes for Navi, but the thing we're talking about here is the fact that we have driver displays for Renoir APUs. So, let's go on to our final topic, which is actually regarding Sony. So, we have a patent application in this case for cloud gaming systems. So, the actual patent reads as such. Quote, systems and methods provided for cloud gaming. One system includes a plurality of computing resources in one or more data centers. The plurality of computing resources is configured to execute instances of games for client devices that are remote from one or more data centers. For instance, for an executable game is associated with a processor, a graphics processing unit, and memory. Memory is used for storing video games generated for the executable game. The video frames are compressed for video game streaming to one or more client devices. The executable game is associated with video, audio, and input channels for said one or more client devices to control interactivity of operation of the executable game during said video game streaming. The cloud gaming system implements at least one channel driver to facilitate I/O processing for the one or more client devices when executed by the computing resources of the one or more data centers. So that's a lot of words, but essentially what all of that means is that they have yet another cloud gaming patent application. Is this perhaps some newfangled upgrade of PlayStation Now for the PlayStation 5? That is very, very much possible. Now, obviously, it's been pretty much confirmed by Mark Cerny that the PS5 will be backwards compatible with PS4 and PSVR games, but obviously we don't know anything about PS3, and I would be very surprised to see PS2 backwards compatibility, so it's those sort of games that we most likely would see on this cloud gaming service, assuming it is some sort of upgrade or similar service to PlayStation Now for the PlayStation 5. We could speculate endlessly about what this is. It could be literally nothing to do with consoles. I mean, it probably is. Well, I said by consoles, I mean the PlayStation 5. For all I know, they're working on a new Vita or something. Highly unlikely, guys, but yeah, it's possible. Anyway, so yeah, they are filing a patent. And again, just because they're filing a patent doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see a product at the end of it. So, that is me done for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.